Good afternoon, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio's online lunchtime talk. These are live every Friday at 1 p.m, beaming out onto your smartphones, laptops, iPads, and living room televisions. My name is Martin O'Leary, and I'm the Pervasive Media Studio's creative technologist. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. An especially big welcome to you, those of you who are new to the studio. For whom this may be the first time that you're engaging with us. For all of you newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol. We're a home for early ideas, companies, and a meeting place of both the creative and commercial industries. We're a studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities, all for free for our residents. And we're a safe space for artists to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. This week's talk is by artist Matthew Plummer-Fernández. He'll be talking about the interrelationship of algorithmic systems, pop culture, and contemporary issues, as well as how his own work has shifted in response to the climate crisis. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, with the talk running at around about 30 to 40 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just pop them into the chat window. I'll pick them out to ask Matthew. Or if you like, you can tweet your questions to @PMStudioUK. A captioned version of this talk will be available here after the talk is finished. Now, before we start, next week's talk is by studio resident and founder of Limina Immersive, Catherine Allen. She'll be talking about how the barriers to entry for immersive technology and how we can overcome these to widen the appeal of virtual reality. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PMStudioUK on Twitter or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit that button, give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. And please feel free to share this link now on any of your socials. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Matthew.
Hi, thank you, Martin. Thanks for that nice warm welcome. It's great to be invited by the Pervasive Media Studio. So today's lecture will cover a few different things, a few different aspects of my work in more or less chronological order. So I'm going to talk first about some past works of mine, then a work called Echo Alarm, which was, I guess, the kind of first project to sort of shift towards consideration for the climate crisis, and then I'll talk about some experiments around ecology, some experiments in CGI, and then finally a new series of works that I have named cave paintings. So for those of you that have never heard about what I do before, around 2012 I was very much interested in 3D scanning and 3D printing, and I was very excited about what was quite a crude bit of technology at the time, which was photogrammetry. This is a way of 3D scanning items by taking lots of photographs, and then a bit of software stitches all those photographs together. And I worked with the processing community to help make my own little apps. And I was quite new to coding at the time, so this was quite a new thing for me. And it was a real learning curve to learn how to make my own apps. And the reason why I wanted to make my own apps was because at the time, 3D modeling suites weren't quite suited to 3D printing. 3D printing, especially 3D printing in color, was such a new thing that to sort of send that kind of color information to a 3D printer was a bit complicated, or at least I found it complicated. So making my own apps allowed me to do things in this kind of more parametric way, more algorithmic, and produce, you know, these kind of algorithmically driven patterns and patterners for 3D printed objects. And the concept at the time was about remixing these 3D files. So I was scanning household items and then distorting them and changing their color. And yeah, the 3D printing process I was using at the time was this printing in this kind of plaster, and prints the kind of the colors as inks onto that plaster, and then you kind of get these really cool, colorful objects. So this is a series that was titled Digital Natives. It was kind of an important step in my practice, and the series continued for a few years, and it's been featured in several shows on 3D printing, including one at the Pompidou. But it kind of put me onto a different pathway, which is an interest in copyright and copyright issues. And this was namely because of this figurine here. So this started off as a scan of Mickey Mouse toy. It was distorted with my software systems. However, it sort of threw up these kind of contentious issues around copyright. I materialized at the time, did not want to 3D print these objects because they were, in their eyes, still under copyright protection, even though I thought, well, this is an interesting taboo because, I have distorted these. At what point do you end up with a Mickey that is no longer Mickey? So this kind of inspired a series of experiments into unmickying a Mickey Mouse. And I really love this one particular approach, which was like smoothing out Mickey so that you'd end up with this kind of a totally abstracted version. And somehow this one kind of passed that threshold of no longer being a Mickey Mouse and getting passed through to the printers. Similarly, I developed a project called Every Mickey, in which I was trying to just collect all the bootleg Mickeys I could find on the internet and amalgamate them in one massive Mickey of every Mickey merged together. Also, since 2012, have been running a blog called Alba Pop. This Tumblr account has been really formative for my ideas, my thinking around how do I contextualize my work as part of a response to automation, software automation, and algorithms in everyday life. And so I was really interested in anything from like apps that people are using where this app, for instance, does a face swap, and people were sharing not successful face swaps, but actually unsuccessful face swaps. And here, for instance, someone's face has been swapped with a car rim. So my blog sort of kind of cataloged a lot of these anecdotes, these kind of strange mishaps of technology, even just strange ways in which algorithms became part of public discourse. This is an advert for a search engine. This is a bit of a mishap on Facebook, also using computer vision to detect faces. And this is one particular example of Facebook that I really like. This anecdote is about how people who would refer to themselves as grandma would be auto-completed to be called Grandmaster Flash. And this was kind of an incident that would happen regularly at the time. Everyone called grandma would be auto-completed to Grandmaster Flash. And there's so many cases up on algopop, but here are just a few. This is someone using a Google Translate on an advert, and it's written the word Slayer across someone's face. And it turns out the word Slayer in Hungarian actually looks like two eyes with some eyelashes. And that's why that person's face has been translated to Slayer. And so inspired by a lot of that kind of research and thinking, I went through a phase of doing a lot of bots. This is how I know Martin. We're from that bot community. One bot of mine that I would like to talk about briefly is Shivintager. Shivintager is a collaboration with Julien Dessoif, and it is a bot that inhabited Thingiverse. Thingiverse is a platform for sharing 3D print files. So in a way, it was a way of opportunistically merging my interest in 3D printing and bots. And it's a bot that made these remixes of other people's objects. So again, this is kind of playing with ideas of copyright. And interestingly, in the case of Thingiverse, copyright isn't necessarily an issue because a lot of objects are licensed for remixing under Creative Commons license. So this was almost kind of pushing the limitations of that alternative model. And it created these kind of mashups of other people's objects. And it also mashed up the names of objects to come up with new names, like vertical pyramid on a dip chip. And so this is a one of the few projects that's gone on to have a solo show dedicated to that work. And Julie and I were invited by email in Brussels to exhibit the work. We created this tunnel. We suspended all the objects in a way that made them look just like how they appear in the render. So getting the right orientation, having the nice gray background and soft shadows and pearlescent colors for them to like really pop out. And the show for us was also a way of talking about some of the other issues that I'm kind of skipping over today just to cram everything in, but the show also included a lot of comments from Thingiverse users and talked a lot about, yeah, that sort of collaborative process of working with all these different authors. So moving to the next project I'd like to discuss, Echo Alarm. It's been a bit of a segue into something totally new in my practice. That it was invited by Somerset House to actually work on the Charlie Brown exhibition, Snoopy exhibition, and I wanted to make these workshops for children to talk about the climate crisis and pollution and all these issues that I felt that were going to be very pertinent to them. And it's interestingly that same year, Greta Thunberg started her her movement. So it kind of coincided really nicely with what was happening around the world. These are some examples from the workshops that we had. And the idea was to kind of put these all in augmented reality. So kids could kind of put on this whole like virtual augmented reality kind of climate change protests wherever they were. But interestingly, this just coincided with events such as Extinction Rebellion, which kind of made me shift my focus a little bit towards also using the project as a way of documenting that movement and documenting what was happening. And so I was sort of going on, I'm just going to make sure this volume is all the way down. So I was kind of going to these events and documenting the event by just sort of taking photographs of those placards that other people were making, and then I'll put them into the app, and then I could go back around the sites. This is on Waterloo Bridge, which if you've been to London, it's that bridge that connects, you know, Waterloo to the centre, crosses the Thames, obviously. And for this one event, that bridge had been closed off. So I'm just on the bridge, testing out the app with everyone's placards. Everyone's kind of chilling out. Even the police were chilling out that day. And so it's kind of an interesting experiment in how augmented reality could kind of echo or could kind of continue a protest or be, yeah, sort of like sort of a second wave of protest and documenting those protests. So even if all these placards had disappeared or had been thrown away or whatever, you'd have like this record and you could like pull it back out again and set it up again in a different location, and maybe a location where, you know, such a protest isn't allowed, so you can go into other spaces and kind of document your little virtual protest. And the project, because it was a little bit contentious, it wasn't doing so well on getting onto the App Store. So I actually tried to modify it to be more sticker based and something that would work in browser. So this is why I actually shifted the name from Echo Youth to Echo Alarm to sort of change the name for this manifestation. And yeah, this sort of sticker manifestation is really nice because it's quite robust. It doesn't require downloading an app. It doesn't require being on the App Store. Anywhere you see one of those stickers, you could scan the sticker and then you'd see those placards appear, and they would just kind of loop round, hovering above that sticker. So of course, being part of all those movements and hanging around with lots of activists really made me think about climate change a lot more, and thinking about my own practice and thinking about also like material practice, because I was making things. I was thinking about different actions. So I guess, you know, in terms, when you've sort of been with Extinction Rebellion even for a week, you start thinking about, okay, what action can I take? What can we do now? So I actually went around and started planting all these trees. I think I got really obsessed with trees and really interested in, yeah, the self-sustaining systems that trees develop on their own accord, using mycelium networks to connect and recycle nutrients. So in a way, the whole process of planting trees was extremely informative, and it got me onto more interesting ideas around what's kind of known as agroforestry. And it kind of, again, it sort of inspired me to sort of look at these themes within digital arts practice. So I was really interested in one concept, which is succession, which kind of made me think of forests as being kind of almost a lot more dynamic and a lot more active than we sort of take them to be. So every time there's a clearing, there's a series of successions of colonizing that cleared area. So forests that kind of can be considered as being like on the move. And I was really interested in trying to reenact a little bit of that using Conway's Game of Life and doing this kind of bird's eye view of it. But one tree that really stood out for me was Willow. Willow is like this incredible, almost, well, in some practices, very much forgotten super species. It grows really fast. It's native to the UK, but it can be found all across Europe. So it's, yeah, has a really wide range. It grows really fast. It's used a lot for biomass, but traditionally, you know, willow would have been a coppiced material, so it would have been considered a renewable source of firewood or materials for making fences. And I find, you know, these kind of forgotten traditions or sort of neglected traditions quite inspiring. So I was really interested in, yeah, a lot of it is still used for basketry, and, you know, willow comes in all these incredible colors. So this is I guess something we've really inherited from our ancestors, the developing all these different strains, all these different colors, how beautifully straight they are. Extremely functional, practical material that you can keep cutting back and it will grow back year after year after year. So different from, you know, sort of the way we manufacture timber, where we just sort of cut it down and we have to replant those timber farms. Willow is this constant renewable supply of wood, but as long as you kind of work with the limitations of that material, the fact that, you know, that's thin and long and flexible. So I started experimenting with adapting it for use with 3D printing. I was very interested in making these kind of connectors. So I could make frames that were part willow, part 3D printed. Had all these kind of different ideas. I used a lot of CGI in the end to sort of help illustrate some of the ideas. And this kind of particular idea is based around using willow as a structure for growing food vertically. So in very small confined spaces, you could create these kind of micro farms where you're growing not just your food, but you're growing willow to grow the infrastructure upon which you grow more food. So I was trying to think of this very kind of self-sufficient system. And this kind of worked okay for a year. But this whole idea had its limitations. This kind of willow structure was obviously outdoors, and it had to resist all these conditions, everything from like pigeons trying to land on it to really windy days to you know, being watered on. So it was kind of a useful system for growing things, but I had to think of something a little bit more robust. So going back to that interest in agroforestry, I also kind of came across a lot of tree shaping. Tree shaping is, again, some of a slightly forgotten practice. And it's kind of seen as this kind of decorative, slightly comical practice. But I thought, actually, there's something in this. I mean, actually, this is a way better way of making a vertical structure for growing things on. So I kind of, again, used a lot of CGI to sort of render out these ideas, to imagine these verts, as I call them, as these kind of growing living things that are these kind of ecologies in themselves, you know, these that somehow the willow would also be connected to all the other things growing on it through mycelium networks to supply nutrients and water to those other species. So that's kind of a work in progress. I have a little prototype that's starting to take roots, and then I'll slowly fill this up with soil, and hopefully in 5 years' time, I'll be able to tell you if this worked or not. Hopefully it won't take that long. But this is one of those projects that is really long-term thinking. And I think when you get into ecology, it's so different from arts practice because you really have to think, you know, in terms of years rather than days. So CGI has kind of become a tool within my practice to consider long-term thinking. So ideas that I cannot simulate, you know, in prototypes, I have to sort of basically simulate or somehow recreate or visualize in CGI. And so, you know, everything from like the local ecology became a way, you know, became a challenge to learn how to draw these. And yeah, these are just lots of different experiments I got really interested in, and also like very parametric approaches to CGI. So how do you make parametric shaders for bark, for different materials? And then I can kind of simulate these, yeah, these kind of more speculative worlds that are based on principles of permaculture, on these kind of recycling of nutrients, to sort of like really outrageous things, like what if, you know, you did vertical tree shaping for like tens of years and you could create these like crazy structures. So yeah, that's kind of a still ongoing project, and interestingly CGI has become the backdrop to some other things that I'm exploring at the moment. But I'm going to just finish off now with the last. I'm going to talk about 10 minutes about this series of works called cave paintings, and this is something that's, again, it's been another segue in my practice. I didn't really plan it out, but I was invited to work with Another JPEG, the design investigations course at Angewandte, that's the School of Applied Arts in Vienna. We applied for an artist and machine intelligence grant by Google. We got the grant, and we started working on some experiments in machine learning, whereas we wanted to sort of be able to sort of collaborate with machine learning tools. So how can we have this kind of collaborative approach to imagining worlds and building worlds? And so one of the tools that I was really interested in were tools that were designed for you to put in prompts, so actually written prompts, and then these machines would, these neural networks would sort of generate imagery. And so I kind of became really, really fascinated actually within the first iterations of these systems developing an image. I was actually quite enamored with the first steps that this machine would take to generate an image. They were kind of like still very abstract. They were starting to find their form. Normally, other examples that I found would run cycles for tens of thousands of training steps to generate a really detailed, almost photorealistic image. But I wasn't really interested in reaching that photorealism. I was thought actually it's quite cool how it begins, very illustrative and very graphical, and the colors are kind of more washed out. So certain prompts, like here, there's a prompt called of Snow White, and you could almost see the queen in the Snow White film featuring, because the model I was using is by oh, I forgot what they're called now. AI Now? I get them all mixed up. No, OpenAI, that's it. Thanks, Martin, behind the scenes. OpenAI released these fantastic models. They're huge. They've been trained pretty much on the internet. You know, they're raised on the internet. So again, this really resonated with my interest in how algorithmic systems collide with popular culture and everyday life, because they would have seen all these Disney films too. They would have all these other cultural references, because you know they've searched the entire internet basically, and they've picked up all this stuff, all of our human detritus and our cultural detritus, and so there's something really fascinating about asking it to imagine, or to somehow recreate some of those cultural references. And I was really interested in that those early beginnings of an image forming. So I wasn't really interested in the end result. I was just interested in just little bits of that image popping through the very sort of first training steps. So I worked very much in my sort of approach was, I'm going to focus on these first training steps. I'm going to explore what I can do in a very short amount of steps. And so it was very good at sort of developing naturalistic forms. You know, it could kind of quickly merge an image into this kind of like washy looking shapes that evoke like caves and yeah, anything that was like smoke or waves. And what I found, what was quite interesting, organically, I was having this kind of reciprocal conversation with the system. And then over time, we kind of like, I learned how to sort of whisper to it just the right terms, and I managed to kind of tweak the right settings. I managed to kind of fine tune this so that even within just like 60 training steps, I could kind of make these waves or these caves kind of appear, yeah, quite figuratively, and had this kind of really nice palette always. These like beautiful colors, because the colors weren't ever washing out, they were sort of retaining those initial colors. And what I liked, what I kind of discovered through this process is that caves particularly were really useful as a starting point for then dreaming up other things. Like the cave itself became a substrate upon which the computer vision can imagine other things by staring at this cave and seeing all of its contours and its lines. And, you know, that would have been in its own way flickering and changing color ever so slightly. It would start picturing things in those caves. And it had this incredible, striking resonance with our own history of art and making cave paintings. You know, the very first artworks are obviously painted onto caves. So there's something very beautiful and poetic about a computer vision system going through that same process, imagining a cave, seeing the cave, and starting to picture other things appearing in it. So I could then give it other prompts, you know, together with that cave, that imagining of the cave, and here, you know, some rabbits are appearing. And this just kind of got better and better. I kind of found that actually we could create these whole little vignettes, these little mini dioramas that were kind of encapsulated in a cave, and all these little different things we're imagining. And I kind of learned over time that it could project not just things, not just nouns, but like feelings and, you know, very abstract concepts. So it could project sadness onto a cave, or you know, it could present its anxieties onto a cave. So it's just this incredible discovery of finding out that the system could conjure up everything it had learned from us and from the internet and from all its training data, as long as it had that cave upon which to gaze. Yeah, it's been a process that constantly surprises me. Here's a little animation. So it goes very, very quickly, you see, because it only takes like 60 training steps. But here it's imagining, obviously, something that's more underwater. And this is, yeah, kind of a still version of a very similar prompt. Yeah, it's been an ongoing process. So I haven't resolved this project. I haven't found its logical conclusion, but I've enjoyed just that dialogue and opening it up to an audience and sharing it with people as I'm doing it. So every day I'm surprised by new things that I can do with this process. And just to sort of finish off, really, I just want to just say briefly that one of the ways in which I've been sharing this process is on a marketplace for sharing your images and digital artworks as NFTs. And NFTs is quite a big topic at the moment. It's quite controversial in some senses, but I managed to find a wonderful marketplace for sharing NFTs that really aligned with my principles and the things that I valued. And it's based on a different blockchain technology that doesn't involve intensive computation. So it doesn't have the carbon footprint of, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin. It's based on the Tezos blockchain, has a kind of a lower carbon footprint because of the way that it's coded and the way it works. And then this network of artists have been using this marketplace to buy and sell to each other artworks and their creations, and it's become this very inclusive community, and it's worked really well for sharing cave paintings and getting those images out there into people's digital collections. And it's allowed me to also experiment a little bit with the format of how I share these works. So here's just the version that looks like a image on a canvas, and it has a certificate on the back, which is a bit of a joke, bit of a reference to what NFTs are all about. It's this kind of certification of the artwork. And then this obviously, for me, it was important to get the message across exactly what it is that I was doing with NFTs and how it aligned with my principles, how it works. So I wrote this essay called Not Another JPEG, and I embedded it into one of the cave paintings. So one of those cave paintings actually uses steganography to hide that essay, and yet the essay is retrieved on my website by extracting it from the image. And that's it. That's me done for today. Any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm sure Martin's going to help me with that. And then you can also find me on social media, and that's my website. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthew. That was fantastic. Please, people, do get your questions in. We haven't got any yet, so I'm going to kick things off. And I guess sort of leading on from your final point and wrapping it back around to the start, there's a sort of interesting tension between like NFTs are all about sort of exerting a sense of ownership over something which is fundamentally completely trivial to duplicate, and then going back to your earlier work where you're talking about copyright and Mickey Mouse, and I know you didn't go into detail, but I know some of those comments from Thingiverse users were not happy about you remixing their work. So I guess I wanted to see, like, do you think this is like an evolution of how you think about digital ownership, or is it just sort of popping up in different places?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I think the NFTs for me, it's like this ongoing conversation around that topic and around that issue. And it's always like I tend to sort of just test out different systems or stress test them to see what are their failure points. And I think with NFTs there's I guess similar issues, because I could mint the same object twice if I wanted to. We have a problem of people that take someone else's artworks and then they sell it on as their kind of like bootleg copies of someone else, and that's kind of known as copy minting. So we're kind of getting to that phase where these issues are becoming a concern or something to be discussed. And I guess from my perspective, that's something I can kind of tap into because it sort of fits with some of the themes I've been exploring over the years. I don't think I have like the right answer, but what I do find interesting about NFTs on a conceptual level is that it sort of separates the artifact from the object of value. And I find like this, it's kind of quite a mind bender, but really you're not buying the artwork, you're buying the certificate or some sort of this kind of abstracted notion of its financial value. It's almost like we're saying, okay, this thing's not really of value. It's like we've actually managed to extract the value and put it into this other format, and this is the bit that we can trade with, which liberates this thing to be shared and downloaded and circulated for free, as we've always done. But if we still want to have the sort of the financial model that exists for kind of things with a limited resource and that kind of scarcity, we can trade with this thing, which is just a symbolic representation of this other thing. And I find that's a real leap in thinking, and I think that has some really interesting implications. I think we've only just started to touch the surface of what that really means. That we can kind of leave things alone or let things do their thing, and that kind of cultural value can somehow influence this separate container for financial value, and then I guess my hopes are is that that would actually allow transactions and trade to happen without this whole like physical shipping things around and feeling like we have to sort of accumulate all this kind of material wealth, but we can kind of still do some kind of abstract trading and show an appreciation and a value for things without having to sort of hold on to them. But yeah, it's all a bit conceptual at the moment, and I definitely don't have the answers.
Oh, that's really good. I think we'll maybe move on from the NFT topic before we get too controversial. But but something else there as well. I think you talked about this idea of getting away from physically owning objects, and like it feels like you've got a sort of interesting relationship to physicality in your work. Like you've got obviously things like Shiv Integer, which is very much about 3D printing. It's about taking these virtual objects and making them real. They are things you can hold in your hand. And similarly, the verts are they're very much about like real things that live in your garden. Whereas on the other hand, you've seemed to more recently have moved towards a lot of CGI, and the cave paintings are obviously completely unphysical. They're pictures of things that never existed and never could exist. So I was wondering, how that do you feel like that's a change in your work, or is that just exploring the same ideas from different angles, or?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. I think looking back at my practice, sometimes the 3D prints were these kind of physical manifestations of my work that were essentially the bit that I could buy and sell or trade. It's like I had these very digital projects, and they manifested digitally online or on social media or on platforms like Thingiverse. And then we would have to produce like some physical copies, and that's what collectors wanted. They wanted to have, something. And I always conceived of it as like selling souvenirs. It's like people go see, I don't know, the Eiffel Tower, but then they collect like the little physical copy of it and take it home. So in a way, it had this currency. It was this kind of like fiat currency for some of my digital work. So, and I think it used to almost irritate me a bit that, for example, the Pompidou bought the physical works, and they were never interested in the software or in the sort of 3D files or the STLs. For me, that's like the actual work. But they were so kind of like based in that sort of more material way of thinking that they wanted the sort of physical artifacts. But for me, the physical artifacts were very replaceable. If I was to ever break one of my Venus of Google sculptures, I would just print another one out. Like for me, the file was like the really important part of the work, because yeah, that held the key to being able to produce these physical objects. So I guess in a way, NFTs have allowed me to sort of bypass that part of the practice. Like traditionally, I would do cave paintings very digitally. I'd share them online, they'd be on Instagram, and then I'd have to go print them out, put them into frames, call up collectors, say, do you want to buy one? And then, you know, they would be these kind of like the transactional item, the sort of physical souvenir of that project. So NFTs is kind of don't have.
I think we've lost Matthew briefly. We're gonna have to hold on a second while we wait for him to come back or not. Oh, are you back, Matthew?
I think I'm back.
Okay, you froze there for a second.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, I think we're coming to the end of that answer, but yeah, there's this kind of interesting space now. How do I take a project and turn it into both NFTs and physical objects, and what's the relation between those two?
Okay, that's interesting, and yeah, I guess that sort of. How do you feel about the idea that ties you to, you know, you're taking something which is fundamentally mass distributable, but still tying it to that very sort of traditional visual arts collector's mold, where, you know, a single rich person owns the object, or possibly a museum owns the object?
I don't know. I think it's always been a tension, and it's a tension I've managed to tread over my art career. Like I've always managed to somehow find a happy medium where I'm treating my work as a very accessible, very open bit of work. Like anyone can download a Shiv integer. You know, they're all in Thingiverse. You can try and download them. You can 3D print them yourself. But at the same time, I had to sort of resolve another aspect of my art practice, which is how do I fit into more traditional models of collecting, exhibiting, owning. And so I kind of would do a bit of that as well. And I always thought, okay, well, that kind of at least helps sponsor some of these more experimental modes of distribution. It's kind of, yeah, I guess I've always had to sort of play those two roles a little bit. But for me, it's never about choosing one over the other. And I think NFTs kind of helps do a bit of both, because you're still essentially putting a file out there. In this case, my files are now on the interplanetary file system, so they're probably more secure than they would be on my hard drive, and they're sort of out there for anyone to sort of download. Even though it's going through this kind of very traditional model of ownership and collecting, so it's yeah, I wouldn't be able to say if I have one precedent over the other. For me, it's always about trying to do both at the same time.
Oh, cool. So the chat are being very, very shy about asking questions. Come on, folks, get some questions in from Matthew. But I'm going to keep going then if they don't want to. I know I've dabbled in this sort of AI-driven work myself, and how do you feel like when I've played with it? It often feels like I'm, you know, just it's a thing. It's doing its thing almost on its own, and I'm just like pulling some levers and trying to see what happens. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of control, and I was wondering how you felt about that as an artist, as a kind of process, that it's so experimental, but in a very uncontrolled way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great thing. I mean, that's a really good analogy, that you're sort of like feeling like you're just pulling levers and it's doing a thing. And I think my approach is just to put in a lot more levers, you know, so that I feel like I'm trying out some different parameters and tweaking more numbers, because I don't like things to be totally off the shelf, that whatever I'm producing that's visually identical to what other people are doing. So I kind of tend to break things up and putting, yeah, just almost like pushing it like beyond its normal range and just see what happens. But I think with this particular model, because it's so vast, you know, it's been trained on the whole internet. It's got this huge training set that is just unimaginable in a way. There's so much yet to find within that parameter space, and the fact that you explore that space with language, you have this kind of Rosetta Stone, you know, for being able to explore things. You know, you're not having to put in vectors and doing kind of this kind of vector math to explore that space. You can kind of translate that into words. So words for me become almost like little levers in themselves. You know, I'm like, okay, I want to go a bit more that way. So what word would make me go a little bit more in that direction? Like, I kind of like what it's doing there, but maybe if I picked a different adjective, we'll go a bit further in that direction. So I kind of use language as this way of exploring that space. And, you know, language is so, I guess, so flexible, if you like. It's like the ultimate control mechanism. It's like the ultimate dashboard, because there's so many words that you can choose from. And I should have a dictionary out just to, like, you know, randomly pick out some words, because I just end up putting some really random stuff in all the time. I mean, if I try to keep my prompt secret for people to kind of second guess what I've used, but I put in some of the most random things I can think of. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It makes no coherence for everyday language, but to machine, it's just an address. And I think that's really exciting. I find that a really interesting way of exploring, a neural network.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like that? I mean, obviously that's very fun for you, but you can see what you're doing. Do you feel like that comes across to the viewer of the work, or do you think that, like,
Yeah,
in terms of keeping the language secret, if that's the most exciting side of it?
well, I think the thing is, I think the end for me, a lot of like machine learning art is very sort of process driven. It's about talking about your process, about sharing how you've done things differently. And a lot of it is about even visualizing that process. So we see like these kind of morphing videos and you see things take shape. But I kind of wanted to really challenge myself to be able to remove that from the artwork and say, look, does the final image hold on its own? You know, can it still be appreciated without that sort of that contextualization, that discussion, and that unveiling of the process? So I do like run this thing, and I'm having a lot of fun with it, because behind the scenes I'm doing all this stuff with language. But ultimately, I'm selecting the best images that it comes up with, and I try to find images that, I guess full of like little surprises. You know, your eyes are kind of doing kind of something similar. You're doing the sort of computer vision process of looking at this image and seeing if you can see a face or a car or something like that. So it's kind of almost like the viewer is part of that process as well. You're having to project your own ideas and go through the same thing. You know, sometimes I look at the cave paintings and I don't know if a certain part of the image is just, it's trying to generate a bit of a cave, or if it is like a bit of a bodily shape. So it kind of they're fun to explore visually as well. And I think that's what I tried to do with those final images, make them fun for a viewer to explore, rather than it being kind of, about language.
And speaking of bodily shapes, how do you feel about the fact that this is, you know, coming from the whole internet? And we do mean the entire internet. There's some stuff in these models that maybe you don't necessarily want as part of all of your work.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, you know, a lot of it does throw up some not safe for work content, which just kind of gives us a little bit of an insight into what its training data is. But sometimes I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface. Like I want to know what, dark corners of the internet it's looked at without, it being like totally awful. But does it understand like Tumblr culture and meme culture, and has it? I don't know. It's kind of fascinating to see what it throws back, because it definitely has some visual references to things that are very much part of internet culture. And I feel like, I haven't quite fully found that language yet for it to feel like, okay, this is a cave painting of a cave person that's gone out, and they're not in the real world, they're the internet world, and they're coming back to paint on those caves, what they've gone and seen. So I think, we're still sort of scratching the surface there.
All right, great. Well, I think unless anyone from the chat wants to get in a question very quickly, we're going to wrap it up there, because I know I've probably heard enough. So, Matthew, thank you very much for being with us. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks, Martin.
Great. And thank you all for watching. Before you go, next week's talk is by studio resident and founder of Limina Immersive, Catherine Allen. She'll be talking about the barriers to entry for immersive technology and how we can overcome these to widen the appeal of virtual reality. And if you want to hear more from our studio community, Bristol and Bath Creative R&D are running a showcase event today, Creative Futures, Place and Presence, sharing the making and discussions that have come out of their first two Pathfinder programs, Digital Placemaking and Expanded Performance. We'll post the link to that in the chat if you want to join. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PM Studio UK on Twitter, or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to the newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. Please feel free to share this link. Captioned version of the video will be available to watch again shortly after we finish up. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you here again next week.